Camera King against previous Camera King. Can the Vivo X100 Ultra beat the X8 Ultra and take the crown back? Let's find out in this camera comparison, and let's get started. On this beautiful sunny morning here in Wesel, Germany, we are testing out those two here. The new Camera King, the Oppo Find X8 Ultra and the Vivo X100 Ultra. We have two sensors more on the X8 Ultra. Actually, it's just one camera sensor. The other one is just a color sensor, color spectrum sensor. And we have this massive 200 megapixel sensor here on the Vivo as telezoom or periscope zoom camera. And we have two periscope zoom cameras or telezoom cameras on the Oppo, as well as the 1-inch type sensor that we have on both here. And then we also have some front-facing cameras here that are pretty equal, but let's see how they will react in video. Front-facing video here on the Oppo Find X8 Ultra. What do you think about this one here? We have 0.8 times magnification, we have 1x magnification, and I can even zoom in 2x if necessary. Let's go back to 0.8x. I think this is the perfect one for vlogging. How good is HDR? I think it is overblowing the sky there, so it's not as good as some other competitors that have nice HDR at 4K 60 or 4K 30. I'm recording 4K 30 right now. There's a 4K 60 sample as well available with Dolby Vision HDR, because both the Oppo and the Vivo support this. Sadly not on the front-facing camera, but on the main cameras that we will check out in a second. But let's check out the Vivo and see how good this is performing with the front-facing camera. 4K 30 frames per second now recording here on the front-facing camera of the Vivo X100 Ultra. Same situation. I think it's still also overblown a little bit there of the highlights there in the sky, in the blue. When I go like this, there's a bit of blue, but here it's a bit overblown. At least on screen it looks like this. So what do you think about this one here? How well is this performing? Sadly there's no zoom in or out option, but I have the possibility in 4K 30 and 4K 60 to switch to the main camera sensors, which is quite cool. But the downside is you have a little bit of like lost audio there. So could be that I start in the middle of the sentence or something like this. So what do you think about the front-facing camera here on the Vivo? Vivo usually notoriously is a little bit worse in terms of stabilization there. It's a bit more robotic, and it's definitely not as stable as on the Oppo. And yeah, lens flare, I think it's on the front-facing camera an issue, but benefit of the doubt, I didn't test it on the Oppo right now, so let's don't equal it in to this. So what do you think about this one here? Main camera video now on the Oppo Find X8 Ultra, and this one has nice colors. It is a bit like lifting up the shadows in comparison to the Find X7 Ultra that I liked a little bit more, but in this case also in this like bit of hard situation where we have shadows, where we have a little bit of sun that is like maybe getting on my face, I don't know, sometimes. So what do you think about this situation here? What do you think about this? 4K 30 frames per second, we can also switch to the ultra wide angle, no issue, just by tapping a button. I just have to see the button there. So what do you think about this one here? How well is it doing? Stabilization should be fine, even though this ultra wide angle has been slightly downgraded. I think it's still doing a fine job. So what do you think about this one here? And now we want to zoom in. So let's go 2x here, switch lenses to the main, 3x, and then 6x. Also should have switched lenses, super stable. And then we can zoom in. This is 10x, this is 20x, super stable, and this is 30x. 30x is stretching it a little bit there. Let's go back to 1x. Very nice. The animations, the stability, I'm happy. Now 4K 30 frames per second on the main camera sensor, the 1-inch type sensor on the Vivo X100 Ultra. The X100 Ultra tends to overdo it a little bit with not only sharpening, but I think mainly with the punchiness of color. So my face should be way more yellow and the greens should be way more exaggerated than they are actually. So they're not so yellow and punchy, they're more like duller greens right now. But what do you think about this one here? 4K 30 frames per second, we can switch between all lenses, so I can go also to the ultra wide angle here, and this is the ultra wide angle. It should be on paper a little bit wider, I think. So what do you think about this one here? Or maybe it's the same. Maybe it's the same. So what do you think about this one? Let's try to zoom in and use this periscope zoom, the 200 megapixels. First 2x here, switch lenses, 3.7x and switch lenses. I had a bit of a blurry face there. 10x switch lenses, a little less stable. Then we have 20x, the maximum, and it's a little less stable, at least on screen. Maybe in the video it will be more stable there. What do you think? This is like 20x. Let's go back to 1x. So which one do you think performs better here in terms of video? Front-facing video, what you can clearly see is that the Vivo is a bit more cropped in than the Oppo. Second is that the Vivo is less sharp than the Oppo for most of the frame. Even if I play it back here, and let me just mute the audio there, you can see HDR has some issues on both. There's like burned out on the face there on both there. And if I move around a little bit more, there's a little bit of lens flare effect issues on the Oppo. But also both struggle a little bit with the HDR there. The Oppo is doing a bit better job with stabilization, has the flexibility of zooming in and out, plus like even 2x zoom, and it has also autofocus, which is quite nice and handy. But when I walk around here in this situation, you can see don't see the footsteps nearly as much as you can see here on the Vivo. So the Vivo's in terms of stabilization much worse there. In terms of colors and details there, I think it's a bit warmer again on the Vivo. It's a bit colder on the Find X8 Ultra. It's a bit more realistic. You can see it here also with the greeneries. Then the background, this green here is the same as this, or should be the same. This one is more realistic than the one on the Vivo for sure. So yes, I think front-facing video is going to the Find X8 Ultra. Better stabilization, slightly better colors, and in general, I think a sharper shot. The main camera shot in the same conditions is quite interesting because they both struggle a little bit with the saturation and HDR, but I think the Oppo is doing a slightly better job with HDR than the Vivo is doing. When we take a look at the stabilization and colors, both are doing fine with the stabilization here. I don't notice much of a difference between those two there. It's a bit more greenish looking here. Why is that the case? Because the sun was shining through the greenery onto my face, painting my face a bit greener, where the Vivo tries to keep the face color more realistic by giving it a warmish kind of hue, just like it's always doing this, and yeah, going against this green. More realistic is probably the one on the Oppo, thanks to its new color sensor, it's getting there. But also in terms of like lens flare, we can see the Oppo is like slightly worse doing than the Vivo is doing there. But in this situation, you can clearly see the difference in terms of colors. Here, I'm like going out of the greenery that I was underneath there. And now I get more realistic colors on my face. This is how my face looked like. Sharpness is okay. It's a bit over sharpening. You can see also the background being a bit more busy than it should be. But the Vivo is not much better. It's also busy background bokeh there. And we can see it's still warming up the face a little bit more there on the Vivo. This is a, yeah, what I call illness, but it's an issue that I have with the Vivo where I don't like the colors so much. You can have a different opinion than that. You can see this black, for example, might be more to your liking than this like bluish kind of black that we have here. But, and you can see like it's, when I'm going under the greenery, it's like, it's a hard condition. But I'll show you another video where I can exactly show you what I mean. Let's go and check out the switch to the ultra wide angle. First, the Find X8 Ultra. You can see that there are lens flare effect issues there, but the switch to the ultra wide angle, and it's quite nice. And the colors are looking pretty realistic there and consistent. On the X100 Ultra, the switch is also quite nice. No issues there with this. Also a bit of lens flare issues there, and also quite realistic there in this regard there. And both ultra wide angles struggle a little bit where with the sunshine and the lighting there. You can see it there on the Vivo and on the Oppo. And when it comes to faces and colors here, I think now it is a bit overblown. Definitely there on the Vivo, but the Oppo, let's go back a bit. There has also this overblown kind of state sometimes. Doing a little bit better here still with HDR, I would say. A bit more contrasty look on the Oppo. The color here now a bit darker, here a bit brighter on the Vivo. Stabilization, I think, is a bit better on the Oppo. And you can see why now. When I start panning, look at what the Oppo is doing. Looks very smooth and natural as a pan. Now look at what the Vivo is doing. See, it's a bit stuttery, a bit more robotic, not so natural. It's stable for sure and both doing a fine job, but still I would give this more of a robotic view on the X100 Ultra, where the Find X Ultra is a bit smoother. When it comes to the ultra wide angle here in this situation, you can see the over punched colors on the Vivo here with the much more contrasty look that we have, in contrast to the Find X8 Ultra that has much more realistic colors, is doing a little bit better with HDR. Yes, it's brightening up the shadows a little bit more, the contrast to what they're doing in the photo mode. And when we go to 100%, this is the Oppo. Maybe it's overdoing it a little bit there with the HDR. And this is the Vivo. Just two punchy colors. I'm sorry, but this is just two punchy colors. And here both a little bit over brightened there, this spot there. It's just two punchy colors, and the contrast level, I think it's a bit too high on the Vivo. But you can tell me which one you like better here in this regard. And when we start zooming in, this is the zoom switch animation. And this is the zoom switch animation here. Here it stuttered for a second, and here it was like blurry for a second. Which one we prefer? When we zoom in even further, you will see that it changed slightly the color here. You can see it there from the 2x to the 3x. Where here, when we change it, also changed slightly the color, and we have this like the contrast level as well. Yeah, this is the contrast level, and this is the other contrast level. So this is like both on par, I would say there. Maybe slightly win for the Oppo, because the Vivo, you can see it was like blurry for a second again. Where here, it's just like changing the color of the blue on the sky. The rest is like very consistent, as you can see here from frame to frame. Not much of a difference. Just the sky color, where you notice that they're switching lenses, where here you can clearly see there's, it's hard to tell, but it is a little bit there blurry, and there was also a blurriness part. Which one looks more realistic? In this case, I think the blue on the sky on the Vivo is more realistic, where I think it is brightening things a little bit too up. And yeah, here the Oppo is doing a bit darker exposure, which is nice. Both doing a nice job there. When we then go to 6x here and go to 6x on the Vivo, actually it's 10x on the Vivo, and then we go here on the Oppo also to 10x. There we go. Which one appears to be sharper and more detailed? Look at the spikes here on the Vivo, and let's compare it with the Find X8 Ultra. I think I can see individual spikes here on the Find X8 Ultra, where I would give the Find X8 Ultra the benefit of the doubt. And when we zoom in even further, the maximum is reached at one point. It's like 20x versus 20x. And when you compare it now, look at the detail level, the spikes, or the ornaments around this bird. I think again, now because it becomes clearer here. Now let's check it out if this becomes clearer at any point. It was like a little bit like there, but still, I think the Oppo is doing a nicer job with the zoom shots than the Vivo is doing at this point. So yeah, and I promised I show you another shot, because I'm usually doing multiple shots but only showing one shot. But this case I can show you another shot here where I want to talk about the color differences. This is like, yeah, I make a face because like this is the issue that I have with the Vivo, and why I'm giving the Oppo more points for video for sure. And there's not only stabilization but the colors. Look at the colors, same situation, same position. This is the Vivo. Way too orangey, way too warm, way too punchy colors. And this is the Oppo. Much more realistic looking colors, foreground, background, much more natural looking. So this is one of the main issues I'm giving the Oppo. Gave the Oppo last time more points than the Vivo, and I'm still giving the Oppo more points than the Vivo there, because I think they nailed it in terms of colors. Paired this together with a slightly bit better stabilization, especially when panning around. It's less stuttery than the Vivo is sometimes do. The Vivo is sometimes a bit more robotic, like it's not a fluid animation when I pan. It's like slowly going down like I would do with the camera. It's more like stuttery, like a sudden stop and so on. And yeah, this is what I like on the Oppo a little bit better than on the Vivo. This is why I'm giving the Oppo more points for video here. You can write down in the comments that I'm totally wrong if you want to, but I think that the Oppo is performing much better than the Vivo in terms of video. We have plenty of photos to get through, so let's get started immediately. Oppo Find X8 Ultra always on the left and Vivo X100 Ultra always on the right. We start off with 2x zoom just to see which one handles it better. It's a crop on the main camera sensor, and you can see immediately we have more contrast level, maybe a little bit more punchy colors on the X8 Ultra, where on this dull day the X100 Ultra has a little bit more tuned down. Yes, I do multiple shots. This is on the dull day, and I have also later shots with the nice sunny day. But here the X100 Ultra looks a bit more natural. It's a bit too contrasty on the X8 Ultra in terms of sharpness and detail level. I think the X100 Ultra is beating the X8 Ultra. Let's go to the next 2x shot. This is in daylight, sunshine shot, and here I think the X8 Ultra has much nicer colors, where it's like overdone on the X100 Ultra. Even though size natural is chosen here, we have more punchy colors for sure, and here I like the colors on the X8 Ultra a little bit more. Contrast levels are very similar, but when you take a look at here, the black is much blacker, much deeper here, where here you can see a bit of this wall where here's almost like completely invisible. So yes, the X8 Ultra still has more contrast. In terms of detail level, much closer together there, but it is still, I think, a slight win for the X100 Ultra in this regard. Macro shots, quite interesting because both can close focus with their tele zoom sensors, and 70mm on the X8 Ultra, 85mm on the X100 Ultra. Very comparable. We get a bit more background blur thanks to the larger sensor and closer up focus. And in terms of detail levels, very similar. Maybe it's slightly more punchy yellow here, where here it's going a bit more to the orange kind of color, but it's very similar. We can punch in, crop in basically a little bit here with both, and this is not using the 6x extra lens on the X8 Ultra, it's just cropping in through the 3x. And again, when I even want to pixel peep and choose which one has better details, I would say both equal, but there is a difference that the X8 Ultra has. First is the sensor size is a bit smaller than on the X100 Ultra, and the focal length is a bit further away, but the X8 Ultra also has a full focus mode where it tries to get, for macro shots, not the shallower depth of field, but it tries to have like a focus shift to get more things in focus. And this is what you can see here clearly, where the X100 Ultra has only basically this here in focus. The rest here, for example, is completely out of focus already. Here the X8 Ultra has everything, the whole flower there in focus. This is one thing, is like the smaller sensor size that could be effect here, but the other one is like the soft resolution also, that is like shifting the focus slightly. And you can also clearly see it here, but here you can see like a bit of a downside on the X8 Ultra, at least if you don't like this weird kind of bokeh. Sometimes it can be quite funny. Look at the bokeh boards there. It's like, yeah, showing the little opening for the tele zoom that we have, the Periscope there, quite clearly. So the bokeh boards are looking a bit weird, where here everything is completely soft. But also the sensor size and full focus and not focus. Well, sensor size mainly is like can sometimes backfire, like it's focusing here on the back of this dandelion instead of the front, like I actually wanted it to. Now let's go to the main camera sensor. Not much of a difference between those two. I think there's a bit more contrast again on the X8 Ultra. This is what you can see all over the place there. In terms of colors there, very comparable here. In terms of detail levels, I would even say very comparable, maybe slight edge towards the Vivo again. We saw it with 2x crop, so the main camera sensor at 1x is also maybe a tiny bit sharper there on the X100 Ultra, but it's very comparable. There's not much of a difference. It's not the a little bit more, there's a bit more difference between the main camera sensor on the X7 Ultra and the X8 Ultra. X7 Ultra is much softer than the X8 Ultra. There's a bit of softer look on the X8 Ultra in comparison to the X100 Ultra, but it's not the same difference that we saw when I was comparing the two Oppo phones. And also in sunny days, much punchier. Again, a bit overdone the colors, so I don't think the Vivo is handling it when there's sun out. It's like getting too much punch in the green grass, where it is a bit better on the X8 Ultra. It's a bit, a tiny bit colder here, which is, I think, more realistic. Then we have a bit more punchy black, so that means like more contrast levels. HDR is better on the Vivo. You can see it's like, because of the contrast levels raised contrast levels, we have like a bit, always like almost overexposing kind of look on the Oppo, and it's better on the Vivo. Then we have different color profiles, we can choose master mode on the Oppo. This is the master mode, has tuned down HDR. It's looking a bit more what it really was. This is like the vivid mode here on the Vivo. It's getting everything a bit too vivid there. And also it had some focusing issues there on the Vivo, as you can clearly see something is going on there. And the next shot, it was done in textured mode, just as a comparison to the master mode here. Or maybe let's go to another one, which is like even more duller here. If you want to create a completely different day, it's possible on the X8 Ultra. But again, the sharpness and detail level, I think the X8 Ultra is exceeding here in this case. It's a bit like it has focusing issues or something like this on the X100 Ultra. Selfies, quite comparable. It's just 32 megapixels here on the Oppo, and it's like 12 megapixels here on the Vivo. It's a bit cooler on the Vivo, it's a bit warmer on the Oppo. The eyebrows look a bit more over sharpened on the Vivo, it's more natural here on the Oppo. The hair cutouts here, I think the Oppo is a bit better than the Vivo. The Vivo struggles a little bit more, and it has overall a little bit of an over sharpened kind of look, where I like the more natural look on the X8 Ultra, except maybe the color being a bit too orange, but this can be maybe corrected as well. And then we have the ultra wide angles and a dull day. Again, the color is much nicer on the X100 Ultra, where the more contrasty look is helping, but it's just too warmish looking on the X8 Ultra. But the detail levels here are quite shocking at first glance, but when you look at the real detail there, like for example here, do we have more details on the X8 Ultra? We don't actually. So the only thing I think that is happening here is we are having a much more aggressive sharpening algorithm on the Oppo that is sharpening things for the ultra wide angle in its favor. If you want to crop in, it just appears to be sharper on the Oppo. But I think it's not real detail. And with the wider field of the Oppo, of the Vivo, the Oppo I think is on par when it comes to the ultra wide angle with the Vivo. It's just, yeah, you can tell me which one would you give more points here. And the same goes for here. Color again, a bit too warm, a bit too cold. And yeah, in terms of detail levels, I think very comparable there with each other. It appears again a bit sharper on the Oppo because it has more aggressive sharpening. Here, quite interesting, we have a bit of difference there with HDR, because here it's raising things, the shadows a bit more, where here it's keeping them a bit darker here. The Vivo, I think, a bit more realistic there than the Oppo, which is raising the shadows there a bit. Again, the difference in terms of sharpness and yeah, everything what I told you in the last pictures there. Now let's come to the telezoom sensors. Again, in terms of like colors, I think the Oppo is doing a little bit too warmish kind of colors, where the Vivo is a bit too dull, a bit too bluish kind of colors. This is 70 versus 85, so 3x versus 3.7x. In terms of detail level, very comparable. I don't see much of a difference between those two. More shallow depth of field here on the Vivo makes this bar here already out of focus, where here it's still in focus and has a bit more detail. We have a bit more aggressive sharpening all over the place on the Oppo than in comparison to the Vivo. When you zoom in a bit more, you can see there's a color shift here on the Oppo. It's switching to the 6X. The 6X has much nicer colors, or much more realistic colors, where the Vivo also has a slight shift towards warmer colors, but here the Oppo is taking the more realistic kind of colors for sure. When you go into detail levels here between those two, very comparable. Yes, it's a crop on the X100 Ultra, it's a very large sensor to match the Oppo. When we go in further, we can clearly see that it becomes evident that the Oppo is winning slightly against the Vivo. First of all, the blacks are black, here's a bit more bluish. And then look at this here, for example, compared with this. It's not only sharpening, I think it's also doing some AI magic trickery to get the details out of the shot there, which the Vivo is not doing here in this case. And the more you zoom on 20x, the more it becomes evident. 30x, yes, the Oppo is doing a slightly bit better job. And this you can also see here, for example, with text. But why is that the case on the Vivo? Because the Vivo, I had the AI disabled, because this is a feature that you can do to not have completely going out of yeah, harm's way, let's say it like this. And again, a bit hazy looking on the Vivo, a bit more contrasty looking, a bit more realistic looking there, because it's what I saw with my own eyes was a bit darker than this hazier kind of look. You can see a bit of like chromatic aberrations there that are not corrected so nicely. It is not perfect on the Oppo, but when you want to read text far away, then yes, the AI helps. But if you turn on the AI, let's do it here on the Vivo and compare it with the Oppo. Then it comes much closer to each other. It's a bit more punchy colors still on the Oppo in comparison to the Vivo. But yeah, it's very, very close. But here, with AI enabled still, we get this dull look here on the X100 Ultra, which leads me towards saying, yes, it might be more realistic looking for optical zoom, but what you actually want to have is what the Oppo is doing. And the Oppo is not too artificially looking with like the X200 Pro on Vivo's side is doing, with too much over sharpening and adding too much details that aren't really there. Look at the rust here, for example, is not there on the Vivo. So this is leading me towards giving the Oppo more points for the telezoom than the Vivo, at least for daylight shots. And the same goes like for this here. Again, a bit less contrast you look on the X100 Ultra, a bit more contrast on the X8 Ultra, 85 versus 75. We saw that already. There's not much of a difference between those two. Even with AI enabled, no. It's a bit brighter, a bit more details that you can see here, because here it's a bit too dark, but this is like a color shift that you don't like to have when going from the 3x to the 6x, but yeah, it is acceptable still, I would say. Then this shot here, again a bit duller on the X100 Ultra. This is now photographing into this tunnel basically where everything is dark, and I want to trigger the night mode. Both didn't trigger the night mode, just took the shot, which is quite interesting and good that both did it also with the same shutter speed. And but it is like a little bit too hazy and less contrast. It doesn't look so good on the Vivo in direct comparison to the Oppo, even though the detail levels probably are the same. It's just a bit, the Oppo is over sharpening things a little bit more than the Vivo is doing. But yeah, which one you prefer? You can write it down in the comments, but I'm leaning towards giving the Find X8 Ultra here a little bit more points for the telezoom than the Vivo X100 Ultra, where I see the main camera sensors and the ultra wide angle very, very close, where I see a bit of more sharpness on the ultra wide angle on the X8 Ultra, but it's artificial sharpening, and I see a bit more sharpening on the X100 Ultra, a bit more details on the X100 Ultra at the 1x and 2x crops on the X100 Ultra, but would be negligible, same points here between those two. And yeah, there's another shot here that shows why I'm giving the more points towards, this is 300 versus 345. This is like the optimized versions. You click on the 6x button or the 4.3x button another time, and this is what it gives you. And here where I would say the AI, look at the Mercedes, the tire on the Oppo is doing a better job in terms of zoom resolution than the X100 Ultras do, even with its AI enabled. So this is why X8 Ultra wins the telezoom here in daylight. When we take a look at portraits, let me be clear, I took those portraits here of my daughter, and I'm censoring her face a little bit so you don't see her so much. I took them at the same time with the 70, actually 47 2x zoom and the 50mm zoom. But as you can see here, she's much closer on the X100 Ultra than on the Find X8 Ultra. So the Find X8 Ultra has a much faster shutter speed for that matter in taking this portrait shot. Both struggle a little bit with this, whatever this kind of greenery is here, being in focus, but the rest is like nicely, as you can see here, she's like nice and sharp. When the Vivo, she was like, of course, moving around, everything a bit blurry there, not so sharp. So shutter speed difference, especially for moving subjects, kids, dogs and so on, is much better on the Find X8 Ultra. So they really nailed it there in faster shutter speeds, even for portrait shots. When it comes to other shots like this 85mm here, you can clearly see that we have a bit of more nuances in the skin, and the face and the colors are just looking a lot nicer there for this portrait shot than on the Oppo than on the Vivo, which is smoothing out a little bit. The colors are not as nice, like the nuances and differences of the skin color are much better there on the Oppo. The same goes like for sharpness and detail level there. I think Oppo is like sharpening things up a little bit, but it doesn't appear to be over sharpened, which is quite nice. So here, if you compare this and this, I think the Oppo is also doing a little bit better there than the Vivo is doing. Then we have Timmy here, 35mm, and here it's quite interesting that also I think the focus, the fake focus, or fake bokeh actually, for the focus, the Oppo is again doing a bit of a nicer job than the Vivo. It looks a bit artificial in the Vivo. Everything here is in focus. Here it's not much nicer. Yes, some people might say, yeah, the bokeh mode, the portrait mode is like for human subjects, not for animals or objects or something like this. But again, you can clearly see that here the focus fall off there is much more natural than it is on the Vivo, where it's like more in focus and then it suddenly starts getting out of focus. So it didn't detect Timmy there at all. It's quite interesting. And then color wise as well, like it's lifting up the shadows a bit more on the Vivo than on the Oppo. So yeah, you can choose your poison here. Also the color of the green grass, much more realistic on the Find X8 Ultra than on the X100 Ultra. Then 35mm portrait shot here of me. You can see lens flare much better handled with the X100 Ultra and the size T-Star coating than on the Oppo. The Oppo has like a little bit of a haze there. But when it comes to detail levels, again here on my eyebrows, for example, you can clearly see that it is a bit more contrasty looking on the Vivo. It's a bit darker as well, where this is my real eyebrow color. It's not as dark or black as the Vivo makes it out to be. And the same goes for the other eyebrow there as well. And the differences of what you can see in the face, like this red here, is not there on the Oppo. The Oppo looks a bit nicer and the cutouts on both are pretty nice as well. Think the Vivo is cutting out a little bit more than the Oppo is doing. So the Oppo is having a little bit more of the hair strains there in the cutouts. So for the portraits here, I think the Oppo is winning slightly against the Vivo in terms of cutouts. Then let's go indoors here. The typical shots, like in a controlled environment, 70 versus 85mm, very close, but I think a bit warmer on the Oppo. In general, Oppo is warming the portrait shots a bit up, where the Vivo tries to make it more realistic looking. Sharpness is very nice on both here. We're a bit closer up with the Vivo for sure, because 85mm, but again, it's like trying to make it a bit more black, a bit more contrast looking, the eyebrows for example, but also my hair, which the Oppo is not doing, and the Oppo is a bit more realistic there. Talking about the hair strains and so on, I think they're much closer together in this kind of shot here than they were previously. But again, which one would you like? Which one would you prefer? I'm leaning towards the Oppo here. It's a matter of taste maybe. 100 versus 114 had to like get to 5x actually on the Oppo to match it somehow, but it was not exactly 100mm as you see here. But at least I have the fake bokeh on both set to, or the aperture set to f4, so the bokeh should be roughly the same. But here you can see the difference that the larger sensor on the Vivo does, because the Vivo appears to be sharper and is actually sharper and a little bit more detailed, where the Oppo is sharpening up from the 3x lens here. It is doing a good okayish kind of job, but it is artificial looking for sure and doesn't have so much detail that it can pull from this shot, that is for sure. But when you go into 135mm, which is more of a crop in on the Vivo, actually it has to do extra work, and it's the optical zoom on the Oppo is doing a slightly better job there in terms of detail level. Now the Vivo looks a little bit more artificial and the Oppo looks a little bit more realistic. Optical zoom is like almost always prevailing against the digital zoom, and I like the colors a little bit better there on the Oppo as well. So in general, my conclusion is the Oppo is clearly winning against the Vivo in terms of portrait photography. Speed, nicer colors in my opinion, but this can be subjective. Even if you put this out of the equation, sharpness and detail level on the Oppo is on another level than the Vivo. What do you think? 4K 30 frames per second on the Oppo Find X8 Ultra. Nighttime, I'm walking towards the light here, using internal mics and the standard stabilization with the 1" time sensor. How good is its performance here, standing under the light now, walking away from the light? How good is the lens flare? All the lenses have some lens flare effect in this situation. And now I'm in the dark, turning towards the light. What do you think about the Find X8 Ultra? I'm recording with the Vivo X100 Ultra. This one also 4K 30 frames per second. It has usually in the night a slower shutter speed that should help with the clarity of the picture. Walking towards the light, standing under the light here right now. But if I do like this slight movements, you should see a little bit of more blur. How is the handling of the light source behind me right now, and flaring. I think the size T-Star coating is helping here. And now turning like this. So what do you think about this one? Internal mics as well. The night shots, and we start off with the ultra wide angle, both the same behavior as we saw in daylight. Much warmer picture on the X8 Ultra, much colder on the X100 Ultra. When it comes to detail levels, they're very, very comparable. We see a bit of more noise creeping in on the Vivo, where the Oppo is like denoising a little bit more. Even like with the HDR, maybe slightly better on the Vivo, but it's not a huge difference between those two. And yeah, a bit better lens coating on the Vivo, as it seems, in comparison to the Oppo, but the rest is like almost identical there. It's a bit overblown here. We can see a bit of the HDR differences between those two there, here as well. But the rest is like almost identical, like in terms of detail levels and so on. Not much of a difference, where I would like it convinced me basically to give them the same kind of points there for the ultra wide angles. Now let's go to the main camera sensor. It's quite interesting because here I think it reversed a little bit itself from the daylight pictures, because here I think either the sharpening algorithms or the algorithms that the Oppo is using for nighttime photos help a little bit more clearer shots there. HDR, I don't see much of a difference between those two, but if you look at the clarity, it's sharper and it's more clear on the Oppo in comparison to the Vivo. Not only this, look at the red car, for example, compare it with here. License plates, clearer to read on the Oppo than on the Vivo. That's quite interesting that they are behaving the exact opposite than in daylight. And then we come to their first periscope zoom on the X100 Ultra, and the only one periscope zoom on the X100 Ultra. And also very comparable, but you can see clearly not only like the zoom level, even if I zoom out a little bit there, I cannot really do it, but it is a tiny bit better on the Vivo for sure. The sensor is larger there, but it's not a huge difference between them both, I would say. Even like also with the HDR levels and so on, the lights here, the red lights and everything else, very comparable. Let's jump to the 6X, which is like really using the 6X zoom, as you can see here in contrast to the X7 Ultra. And this is now 135. Now let's go to 139, which is a crop in on the X100 Ultra. And here, yes, the X8 Ultra is winning. You can clearly see it here. It's not only the algorithm that is like a bit better in reconstructing text, but it's also clarity here. And yeah, the optical zoom is winning against the digital crop. Okay, it's not a huge difference there, but we're talking about Vivo, that is like the king of long shot zooms with their large periscope zoom lens. When we go in here, you can see a difference in terms of styling there. I think this is a little bit fake. White is a bit more realistic here, and it stays a bit more realistic for the most part. Let's go to 10x here on both. Quite interesting here, because we have a bit of darker blacks. We have this weird kind of light tray because there's a light here going down here, so it's looking very weird on the Oppo. So yeah, definitely lens coating probably better on the Vivo. But when we go in at 10x here and compare it with 10x here, yes, it's still better on the Vivo. This text here, for example, there's a bit of shaking introduced there. But look at the Edeka sign. It's a bit sharper on the Oppo. And also here, I think I can see a little bit more detail on the Oppo in comparison to the Vivo. Same goes for the nuances in colors from yellow, orange, and red on the Oppo, which are clearly three separate colors, where here it's like almost blending in into each other. So yeah, I think the Oppo is doing a and there's another lens flare from the red light now. A slightly bit better job there still at 10x. And then we go to 30x, and then the Vivo is doing some weird shit with the color here. I don't know what's going on there. And the Oppo is clearly winning this one here. And I took the Vivo multiple shots. It always ended up like this. So it had something against the blue and yellow color there. So this is a different story altogether, like a different class of leading. So I was like not expecting this, because the Vivo was doing this test quite well, but in this case the Oppo is clearly winning here, which gives me more strong points to lean towards giving the Oppo Find X8 Ultra really more points than the X100 Ultra for its zoom cam. Will it be the first cam that will get the full 5.0 points here? Probably not. It will end up at 4.9, but it will be 4.99999 in comparison to the Vivo X100 Ultra's 4.98 or 7 points that it has. So both have some struggles, because like getting this shot here with f3.1 was a bit hard at 30x, because it also took me like 2 or 3 trials to get the right lens selected here, because when I zoomed 20 times was fine, but when I was zooming into 30 times, it tried to switch to the 3x 70mm for some reason, so the old issue there, and I didn't see anything in the settings to turn this off. Yeah, the old trick with like macro and turn off macro mode helps in this regard, but I didn't do this. The other thing that I did was just simply going and in the preview mode of the photo, and going out of the preview mode of the photo, then it is at this 30x zoom and using the 6x lens, the real 135mm, and then you have to be quick in shooting and then it works as well. So a little bit of workaround here. I hope we can at one point fix this. Let's go to the next one here. Selfie. You can see we have a bit of a greenish haze around the X100 Ultra. It's making everything brighter here in the background if you want it. Good. On the other hand, this shirt, which is black actually, I'm just looking at the shirt again, it's black, got a bit greenish, where here it is black, maybe a bit too dark, maybe too dull there. That's a matter of style there. We have a bit more processing there. We have to zoom out a little bit on the Oppo. A bit refaked eyebrows there. It's a bit softer on the Vivo. Maybe this is a slight win for the Oppo, but still not enough where I would say the Oppo's front-facing camera would get like totally away from the X100, or blows the X100 Ultra completely away, but it is noticeably better at nighttime shots. So maybe 0.1 point more. I have to see. Let's see in the ranking and conclusion. Ranking and conclusion. TLDR, the Vivo X100 Ultra gets 4.628 points. The old camera king is beaten by the Oppo Find X8 Ultra for sure. Now 4.668 points, and where do we see the huge differences between those two? Main camera photo quality is not the huge difference. Yes, the Vivo appears to be a bit sharper, especially at 2x zooms or 1x, a little bit more detailed, but I think it's more sharpening applied here and there, and it reverses itself when it comes to night photos, because here the Oppo Find X8 Ultra has much more details there, or it appears to be a bit sharper there. When it comes to the ultra-wide angle, it is almost the same there between those two. Yes, the Oppo appears again a little bit sharper, but in terms of detail levels, it is just like, no. It's a not huge difference between those two. Yes, the Oppo at daylight seems to be a bit sharper. The Vivo seems to handle HDR a little bit better there. The detail level is almost on par. So it looks like the Find X8 Ultra has almost the same kind of picture as the X100 Ultra, just with a little bit more sharpening added, where if you want to crop into the picture, the X8 Ultra is a little bit better than the X100 Ultra, but it's not a huge difference where I would say I have to give them points. Where, however, I raised the points for the Oppo is the zoom and portrait photo quality, because here you can clearly see it. Yes, with AI enabled, you cannot disable it on the Oppo. On the Vivo, you can disable it. The Vivo looks with disabled a little bit more natural, but the detail levels on the Oppo are a bit better there. And when you have both enabled the AI, then the Oppo is doing a much nicer and more natural job than the Vivo, even though the Vivo looks already more natural than its cousin, the X200 Pro, that has even more artificial kind of look when you have AI zoom enabled. For portrait photography, yeah, it is a matter of taste a little bit, but I think the more natural pictures, more accurate pictures you get with the Find X8 Ultra. I like this focus fall off a little bit better. I like the cutouts for the hairs a little bit better there. And the colors in general, I like it a bit better on the Find X8 Ultra. So in general, yes, if I would have like another point there, 4.98 or 9, where would be the Find X8 Ultra, and 4.97 or would be the Vivo X100 Ultra. This is like the nuance there, a little bit better on the Oppo. It's not perfect on the Oppo yet, especially at nighttime, where you have to trick it a little bit also to use the 6x lens. It's not as worse as it was in the Find X7 Ultra, where it was completely useless, but it is not perfect yet. If there would be a setting to just disable this lens switching at nighttime completely, maybe there is a setting, I didn't find it at least. There was one for video, but it doesn't work for photos apparently. Then I would like completely give it maybe even 5 points here as a perfect kind of telezoom lens setup that we would have here. But there, the spot is still open. Maybe the X200 Ultra can take this spot. Video recording quality is much better on the Find X8 Ultra. Stabilization is much better. The new stabilization that is like almost gimbal-like, that has like this nice fluid animations instead of like the more robotic one that becomes apparent when you compare them side by side on the X100 Ultra, is just simply very, very good, mind-blowing already. Colors are much better. The X100 Ultra is always like notoriously over-punching the colors. The faces are way too yellow there. And the X8 Ultra, even though it has a little bit less contrast than the X7 Ultra that I liked a little bit better, I think the X8 Ultra is doing a better job. And also the zoom in, zoom out effects are a bit nicer. You can zoom in a bit further on the X8 Ultra for sure. Video recording, other things like extra features, for example, the X100 Ultra definitely wins for the Pro mode for 25 and 50 frames per second, and even I think 24 frames per second are possible there on the X100 Ultra, which the X8 Ultra doesn't have in this regard. But this is something for the extra features. And video recording quality, if you're interested in this, I made a comparison 4K 60 Dolby Vision against 4K 60 Dolby Vision on both, and I think there you can also clearly see the Find X8 Ultra is doing a little bit of a better job there in terms of video, and clearly beating the X100 Ultra also in terms of zoom and clarity there. Autofocus performance is the same, even though the Vivo X100 Ultra in this example here, the shots, they had like 2 misses in terms of autofocus, but in general you don't have much issues between those two. Front-facing camera, however, I would give the Oppo Find X8 Ultra an advantage here. We have autofocus that the Vivo is lacking, and together with like a little bit more resolution that you get with the photos by default, and also I think a little bit nicer looking night photos there. More looking like night, even though there's a bit of processing going on with the eyebrows and so on. With the autofocus, I have to give it a bit more points on the Find X8 Ultra, and it is, I think, pretty good on the Find X8 Ultra. This is why I'm giving it here a little bit more points than on the Vivo, because the Vivo I think is a little bit lacking a little bit, especially at night. It's like lacking too much, and together with the lack of autofocus. For an Ultra phone, it has to have autofocus on the front camera, in my opinion, and the Vivo is lacking this, as it seems. Camera UI, however, I raised the points here for the Oppo a little, slightly bit, 4.3. We're still missing a Pro mode for video. We have now nice filtering options in the master mode, which are quite nice. You can directly see the image. It's like the same. It's copied from iPhones and iOS, but it's nice to have there. We have added extra features. That's why I put it more in extra features as well. We have the EV control now for portrait shots, for example, for video. They added, and we have in extra features also Dolby Vision now on the front-facing camera, which is possible at 4K 60 frames per second as well, which is quite nice. So they made several improvements there, some new extra features that they put in on the Find X8 Ultra. This is why I'm raising the points here. Camera UI, first of all, swipe gestures are now supported. I think they were supported before as well, but they are now these new buttons where you can directly go to a night scene or fireworks, videography scene or something like this, or stage mode, which is quite nice and handy and easy to use and easy to reach. This is why I'm getting here 0.1 point more and extra features. Like many people suggested also, it deserves a bit more points there. And after checking the camera app again and seeing the points, they are valid for sure, and the raising of points here is necessary. So there we can get 4.4 points. It's still lacking in comparison to the X100 Ultra, because the X100 Ultra has a way better camera UI and extra features in this regard. Let's go and check out the ranking list. On top we have now the Oppo Find X8 Ultra. On the second spot we have the X100 Ultra now, and you can see they're so close together. It's like the video recording quality is the main difference between those two, where the Oppo shines really. And the front-facing camera is like also where you clearly see a bit more points. Where the Vivo shines is definitely the camera UI and the extra features. That's for sure. Third place we have the Xiaomi 15 Ultra. So amongst the Ultras, I think the Oppo is doing the best currently, but I still have to check the Vivo X200 Ultra, and it's like quite amazing that the X100 Ultra, even after 1 year of release, can already like also beat the newest Ultra from the Xiaomi, for example, and comes basically identical almost to the Oppo Find X Ultra in this regard. Just like the same issue that they had already also in other devices is the video recording quality is a bit of lackluster, and hopefully the Vivo X200 Ultra can solve this. And maybe when I test it out then in a couple of weeks, hopefully it can also take the crown from the Oppo. We have to see about that. That's everything for this video. If you have some questions, if you have some comments regarding the ranking system, regarding some points, just write it down in the comment section. That's everything for this video. Hope you enjoyed. Thanks for watching. Until the next time. Bye.